Right guys, section B, design brief and design specification. So let's have a look how it fits into the whole project. So we're still looking at assessment objective 1. We're looking at section B now, which is producing a design brief and specification, which is out of 10 marks. So you'll see on the previous section was worth 10 marks. This is also worth 10 marks, which means section A, or assessment objective 1 rather, is out of 20 marks. So in the last video, we talked about looking at the banding of the mark scheme. Okay, so we've done this because that's our design problems. We've looked at our client, we've identified who the client is and what they want and need. We've looked at existing products, and we've also looked at ongoing research throughout the whole project. So these 6 pages are my section A so far. Now you might end up with 8 pages or 3 pages. There is no set amount. It's entirely up to you how much research you do, depending on what is suitable for your project. So the mark scheme for design brief and specification is simply split into 2 sections. You can see 2 sections there. They are only asking you to complete 2 elements for this section, which does sound quite easy, but in order to get the marks, you need to be very, very thorough. So again, this is split into 3 bands. You can see I've got 3 bands there. Again, technically there's 4. There's a 1 to 2 marks at the bottom, but again, it's pointless me showing you that because you're not going to be aiming for 1 to 2 marks out of 10. You can see we've got this comprehensive word again, whereas if we compare that to the second band, we've got good, and the bottom band, adequate. So in order to reach the top marks for this section, it goes back to the same thing again, lots of detail and be thorough. So what is a design brief? So a design brief is kind of like the stepping off or sort of go point. It's kind of like the client saying, this is what I want you to design and make, and I want it to look something like this and have something like this. So it's not being definitive, saying it's going to have 3 drawers, or it's going to have a charging station, or it's going to be made from this material. It's just a brief statement that is explaining what it is you are going to make. However, that is not good enough just for the exam board, just to write 2 or 3 sentences. We need to clearly justify how it meets the user's wants and needs, and all that sort of thing the user wants and needs. And I need to link it to my context. So my context for the Lego storage was a safe and comfortable home. So how does me designing this Lego storage provide a safe and comfortable home? I need to link that back. So here's an example of my design brief. So you can see there's my design brief. I will design and make a storage product for bum. This is based upon my client interview. So I've stated what I'm going to do, and I've backed it up because I've explained the user wants and needs. Now I could finish that sentence and that whole design brief right there. That could be the last sentence I write. However, I'm trying to achieve 9 to 10 marks, which is the comprehensive section. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail and go into some of the features that my client would like. So for example, they would like a simple and accessible type of storage. It needs to be safe for young children. It must be modern in design. It must have a method of storing past creations. These are things that my client has told me, and I know that because on my very second page, I've got a list of wants and needs from a client. I've interviewed them. So not only have I got it on my design brief explaining what they want and why, I've got it clear as day in my research, and that's really important. If I go back to the mark scheme, I've been thorough and detailed as in a design brief. I've justified their wants and needs because I've linked it back to my research, and I've explained how it provides a safe and comfortable home. So already within that first paragraph, I've managed to move myself into this top band here. Now, the design specification. So a comprehensive, again, that detailed and thorough design specification. So a specification is like a success criteria or a list of wants and needs and demands that you think the product has to do or has to have. You've all written them before, but this time we need to make sure we're being thorough and detailed. But not just that, we need to have a high level of justification, and I need to link it to my needs and wants of the user. Really, really important. So again, let's go to my example. I've got my specification points here. So my product must be, my product must have, my product must be, my product must be, etc. So you need to be statements that are going to happen. There's no my product could, it's my product will, my product must. They are definitive statements. Also, your specification points need to be smart. And what I mean by that, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and technical. So for example, the cost is a very realistic, achievable, and measurable target because I can measure how much my product costs at the end of it, and it's realistic because it's within a realistic budget. I'm not asking for £1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 or even £1,000,000 for a storage piece of furniture. It's a reasonable price. So you need to make sure your specification points are smart. Now, where they come from in terms of how do you know what your product needs to do or needs to have goes back to those 6 pages that I showed you, because you've done the research already. You've spoken to your clients, you've interviewed them, you've got client feedback on existing products. By now, you should know definitively what your product must do and must have. So it's really important that you are evaluating your research as you go because it will help you for your specification. So again, I've got my specification points here. I've justified them by referring back to my client wants and needs and using my research to back it up to the examiner saying, look, I know the user wants this because I've asked them in my interview, or I've done some research on existing products and they gave me some client feedback here. So you can see about being modern, I've got due to my client's decor, I've got in my client interview. So again, it's not just this is what it's going to do. This is why it's going to be that way because my user wants and needs it, and I've backed it up on my research. I've even left a space here to write down the page number that this client interview is on. Therefore, the examiner knows specifically what the product needs to do, why it needs to do it, and how do I as the designer know that? Where in the research does it come from? The last column I've got is this test type. Now, you don't have to have this at all. This is something for me to make sure that I'm keeping my specification points smart. As in, once I've finished making the prototype, once I've finished my practical, how do I know I've been successful? Well, I'm going to review it against my specification, this list of requirements here. So for example, my product must be no bigger than 1 meter by 60 centimeters by 1.2 meters. How am I going to make sure my product meets that specification point? Well, it's quite simple. I'm going to get a measuring tape out and actually measure the dimensions. Quite simple, isn't it, really? So I'm making sure my specification points are smart. I'm justifying them in this column. I'm telling them how I'm going to test that specification at the end of it, and I'm referencing the page number for the research earlier on. Now, this page doesn't have to be presented like this. I presented it this way. You could present it something like this using a framework or a criteria method. So they've got the axis of M on the left, their specification points, and their justifications here with no test and no page reference. They've got a design brief at the top, albeit probably a little bit weak, but the rest of it is pretty decent. You could do it this way, where you've got written out the axis of M framework, you've got your specification points, your justification, and a page reference number there. So again, how you present this information is entirely up to you. You don't have to present it in a specific way. You could do it in entire paragraphs. It doesn't have to be in a grid if you don't want it to. But you've got to make sure that you're ticking off that mark scheme. You're making sure that you've got a comprehensive design specification with high level of justification that links the needs and wants of the user. And you've got a comprehensive design brief, as in thorough and detailed, which explains the user wants and needs, and it links it directly to the context that you've been set. Those are the 2 things that we're looking for in this section. Make sure you're going to as much detail as possible.